This evening we want to talk a little about the problem of universal law as we find this exemplified in the philosophies of various peoples. There's a considerable amount of conflict in the minds of many devout persons about the concept of law. We so often think of the term on a legal level, associating it with innumerable restrictions and limitations or peculiarities relating to our own cultural platform. We think of law as something found in great books which have to be studied with emphasis upon precedents and upon all the elaborate machinery of human jurisprudence. And because this is law as we have come to know it, the term universal law has some rather unfortunate semantic implications. We think of law perhaps as just, but we are also inclined to suspect that it is cold, that it is something with very little consideration for the peculiar problems and necessities of human beings, perhaps broadly protective, but often a frustrating influence upon individuals. Thus, in philosophy and religion, we must have a larger concept of law. We must take away from it this tremendous emphasis upon thou shalt not, which seems so often to be important in a penal code. To the idealistic philosopher, law represents not only the eternal will of the Creator for its creation, but also encloses within its concept and structure the other aspects of the Godhead, namely wisdom and love. Sometimes we think that these principles operate differently, but the wisest of mortals have experienced within themselves the simple fact that universal law is the greatest good, the greatest beauty, the greatest love, the greatest wisdom that man can know. Law does not exist to circumscribe or limit the activity of anything. Law exists to permit and sustain the eternal unfoldment of life. Law is forever protective, and it gives to man one tremendously important psychological security. It tells him that this law will preserve, perfect, protect every creature that is true to it, and that through being true to law, man attains all other good things possible to him. And therefore, that a lawful life, a life lived in harmony with law, is a good life, a kind life, a generous life, one thoughtful and filled with understanding. Thus, from fear of law, which was perhaps man's first reaction to the unknown, came respect for law, later admiration, finally love, and perhaps in the highest mystical sense, adoration. Law finally becomes the blazing, living symbol of the divine power itself. And perhaps the very ground of law is its own lawfulness. A law is meaningless if, like mortal statutes, it is subject to innumerable variations, compromises. If we could buy or bribe universal law, there could be no integrity in our world. Yet from early time, philosophy and religion have been in conflict. Philosophy affirming law, religion constantly seeking to modify law, supplying in its place certain other things: grace, forgiveness, and vicarious atonement. Yet actually, whether religion knew it or not, there is no good thing in religion, no promise of spiritual security, no path of light leading to identity with good, but that this security or this path is also part of law. For every quality by which man, through growth and development, can attain to the highest ideals and dreams of spiritual integrity, every ingredient of universal procedure is within law. Now we try to define how we shall understand law. Perhaps we may say that the law, universal law, is the divine will in operation. It is this inevitable, perfectly enlightened purpose, this inevitable of the universe fulfilling its own destiny, this absolute sufficiency by which the plan, already conceived, sustained, and perfected in the divine consciousness, unfolds resolutely and without deviation into the full realization of itself. Thus we have no recourse beyond law. For if law be the divine will, in what way shall we oppose it? And if it be a manifestation of the divine purpose, by what right do we question it? How can we go beyond that pattern or plan which is the total of ourselves? How can we, as fragments of the infinite, doubt the infinite of which we are the fragment? We have no direction to turn, no place to hide ourselves from the fact of law. Therefore, wisdom has long implied that man's greatest good is a joyous, a consecrated, a voluntary obedience. The law tells us that all disobedience must ultimately be dissolved in obedience, inasmuch as the law itself, being inevitable and irresistible, cannot be indefinitely resisted. Any being or creature may for a time or under a circumstance attempt to violate this law, but the law is greater than he is. Not only is it greater than the individual, but it is greater than the totality of creation. Therefore, in the end, the law bends all things back to itself. It remains the ultimate. And in this recognition and in this acceptance, man realizes that security is in obedience, insecurity arises from disobedience. Now, disobedience is possible to man because he has an individual mind. But this disobedience does not make him master of the law. He may, through his own ignorance, his carelessness, his indifference, or his forthright antagonism, attempt to set up his own empire, contrary to the empire of space.